Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Peh Aleph. In the Mishnah, we learned the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim regarding a case of blood from a chatat offering and from, for example, a bechor offering that got mixed together. We were assuming that the bloods of both animals got mixed together in one cup. And now the question is, what do we do with this blood? According to Chachamim, since it's mixed up and chatat has to go on top, and bechor has to go on the bottom. So there's different procedures. Therefore, you cannot sprinkle any of the blood. You have to pour all the blood down the drain in the courtyard, and the korbanot are invalid. However, Rabbi Eliezer says, no, there's a way to rectify it. Instead, you can take the mixture of blood and you can sprinkle it on top of the red line, and the chatat blood will be fulfilled, and the blood of the bechor will consider it as if it's water. And so therefore there'll be no prohibition of putting it in the wrong place. It's just like water. And then the rest of it, you pour below the red line, and that way you fulfill something. Maybe you fulfill the obligation for the other korbanot that go below the red line, and even the remainder from the chatat still has to go onto the base anyway, so that's okay. You pour it below the red line, and then you fulfill everything, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Now, we discussed his Rabbi Eliezer's approach yesterday. Does he assume that there is a thorough mixture or not a thorough mixture? How much do you need from each one? Is there a minimum amount? And so on. We challenged, according to Rav Asher. Rav Asher said, according to Rabbi Eliezer, en bila, that a mixture is not thoroughly mixed. And therefore, we had a problem. If it's not thoroughly mixed, and then you take this mixture of blood and you sprinkle some on top, maybe or whatever you're sprinkling on top is actually bechor blood, not chatat blood. So you didn't fulfill any chatat. And then maybe the one that you're pouring on the bottom is all chatat blood and not bechor blood. And then you're not fulfilling the ones on the bottom either. And we came up with various explanations. Okim tot, we had to limit it to a case where there's a certain amount, and you do 51% and so on. And we ended actually with the challenge of the case of 4 and 1, something that needs 4 sprinkles and 1 sprinkle. It had to be an precise exact amount of just one minimum amount for this and for that. And then we had a problem because then it would not be Bal Tosif, and so we got stuck with a challenge against Rav Asher. So now we begin with a totally new explanation. Ela amar Rava, bebalul la pelige. Rava says, actually, the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim is not when it's mixed together in one cup. It's mixed together in one cup. It would be a problem, according to Rav Asher, because it's not a thorough mixture. And therefore, you would have, you don't know if what you're putting on top is definitely some korban chatat blood and not, and therefore, there's no argument. Even Rabbi Eliezer would say, we cannot sprinkle it because it's all in the same cup and we don't know if it's a thorough mixture. Ki pelige bechosot Rabbi Eliezer it leroin l'Rabbanan let lehu roin. Rather, the machloket is when it's in separate cups. We have a cup of blood that we collected from the chatat, a cup of blood that we collected from a bechor, and then we didn't label the cups. They got mixed up. We don't know which one is which. So Rabbi Eliezer says you can sprinkle from each one on top, and the one that will be chatat, that's for sure chatat, so then you're good. One of them is for sure chatat blood, so you're good to go with that one. And the other one, that's bechor blood, will do ro'in, we'll consider it as if. You can do this legal fiction, we consider it as if it's water, and we do not intend for that one to be a korban, and therefore there's no problem of putting it on top. And then we take the remainder of it, and the remainder of whichever one is chatat, you'll pour below the red line, which is okay anyway, because you're going to have to pour it on the base. And if you pour it a little above, that's okay too. And the other one has to be sprinkled below the base, but below the red line, and so that will also be fulfilled. That's what it's talking about. And Rabbanan, they do not say that you can do this legal fiction and say, ro'in, we consider it as if it's water. And therefore, it's a problem. You can't put bechor blood on top of the red line. And therefore you can't do any, and you have to pour them all down the drain. We challenge Rava's interpretation. Ubebalul la pelige. So that means, according to you, when it's mixed together in the same cup, there is no machloket. V'hatanya amar Rabbi Yehuda lo nechleku Rabbi Eliezer v'chachamim al dam hatat shintare bedam ola sheyikrav. Be'robeya v'nirba shelo yikrav alma nechleku al dam temima shintare bedam ba'alat mum sheRabbi Eliezer omer yikrav ben balul ben bekosot. Chachamim omrim lo yikrav. The main question here is going to be from this line, ben bebalul, ben bekosot. But let's learn the whole baraita. We've seen this baraita before. It says that according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's the 4th generation Tana, not Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who's 5th generation. Rabbi Yehuda says that Rabbi Eliezer, who's an earlier Tana, a couple of generations before him, that machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim is not about dam hatat that got mixed together with dam ola. There, everybody agrees, since these are two valid korbanot, that you can offer them as sacrifice. Even Chachamim say, you do it, you go above and then below, that's okay. And they both agree that if it's a case of robeya and nirba, with an animal that got involved in a sin where the animal is prohibited from even getting benefit from, and certainly even if there's only one witness, you cannot use it as a sacrifice. There, everyone agrees, even Rabbi Eliezer says that you cannot offer it at all because it's totally pasul. There's no machloket about that. Rather, what is the machloket? It's regarding blood of a good animal that is sacrificed, that got together with an animal that is a mum, that has a blemish in it. That's where Rabbi Eliezer says you can offer it as a sacrifice, whether it's mixed into one cup or whether it's in separate cups. And Chachamim say, no, you cannot offer it as a sacrifice. You see that Rabbi Yehuda is disagreeing with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah does not say this. Rather, our Mishnah says the machloket is, in fact, we're talking about when you have dam hatat and dam ola, or two other different types of korbanot that are both valid. That's where the machloket is. So Rabbi Yehuda interprets Rabbi Eliezer Chamim differently from Rabbi Yehuda. But anyway, we do see from this baraita that the machloket is, even if it's mixed together. So Rava, how could you say not so? Rabbi Yehuda alibad Rabbi Eliezer matni ben balul ben bekosot v'Rabbanan bekosot pelige. And the answer is, yeah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he thinks his interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim is that they are disagreeing whether it's mixed into one cup or if it's in separate cups. That's true for Rabbi Yehuda. But Rabbanan, the sages of our Mishnah, and Rava here was explaining our Mishnah. Our Mishnah doesn't have this line, and our Mishnah doesn't agree at all with this baraita here in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbanan of our Mishnah think that Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim are disagreeing regarding separate cups. And if it was mixed together in one cup, then they would agree that, well, you don't know if all the blood that you're putting on top, any of the blood they're putting on top is really chatat or not, then therefore even Rabbi Eliezer would say that you cannot offer that blood on the Mizbeach. Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela techilat hatat ve'ola, aval sof hatat ve'ola, divrei hakol mekom ola, mekom shirayim. Abaye says that this machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Chamim is only talking about the beginning of the process, meaning the initial sprinkling of the blood. You did shechita, you took the blood, and now it's in the cups, and now we don't know which one is which. And so Rabbi Eliezer here says, well, you can put some on top and then the rest on the bottom. That's what it's talking about. And Chachamim say, no, you have to pour it down the drain. However, if it's the end of the process, meaning the sprinkling was done already, and then the bloods got mixed up only after the sprinkling on the Mizbeach, and now all you have to do left with the blood is to pour it onto the base. Well, in that case, that's called sof chatat ve'ola. Everybody agrees that mekom ola, mekom shirayim. The place where you put the ola blood, which is below the red line, is the same place as where you put the shirayim, the leftover of the chatat offering. You sprinkled already on top, and now you have to pour the rest on the base. So when we say base, it doesn't have to be all the way down on the lowest amma. It could be below the red line. And so there's a spot that's an overlap where you can put it in that spot somewhere near the base, on the base, above the base, and that will fulfill both the sprinkling for the olah as well as the pouring out the leftover of the chatat, and everybody would agree that you can do both of those things. Even Chachamim would say you don't have to pour the blood down the drain, as long as you did the initial sprinkling correctly and it got mixed up afterwards. You can pour the rest on the lower part, and that would fulfill it according to everybody. Amar le Rav Yosef, Hachi Amar Rav Yehuda, Shiraim Serichin Itzteba. However, not everybody agrees with Abaye. According to Rav Yosef, he told him that I heard from Rav Yehuda that the leftover remainder of the blood requires a bench, meaning that when for Korban Chatat, you sprinkled some on top, and then the rest of it has to be on the horizontal part of the base, right? The base sticks out like a ledge, and it's an amah ledge, and it has to be poured on the horizontal part of it. Whereas the korban olah and other korbanot have to be placed on the vertical side of the lower half of the mizbeach, and therefore, no, it's not the same. And Chachamim would say, oh, sorry, it's not the same place that you're putting it on, and therefore, even if the initial blood was placed in the right place, even then, still, the end of it cannot be placed all on the lower half, because these are different places. And so therefore the machloket between Be'er Eliezer and Bechachamim would apply also to the end of the process. V'chen amar Rabbi Shimon. And just like we have here a machloket between Abaye and Rav Yosef in Bavel, we're going to have a parallel machloket in Eretz Yisrael. So because Rabbi Shimon teaches, Lo shanu ela techilat chatat ve'of. Aval sof chatat ve'of divrei hakol mekom ola mekom shirayim. Rabbi Shimon, that's Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Resh Lakish. Usually it calls him Resh Lakish. Rabbi Shimon Stam usually refers to Tana, but here it's clear because Rabbi Yochanan is going to disagree with him. That's Resh Lakish. He says that the machloket is only regarding the initial sprinkling. Rabbi Eliezer says you can put above and below, and Chachamim say you have to pour it all down the courtyard drain. But if you did the initial sprinkling okay, and then only the end sprinkling, everybody agrees that it's in the same place. The place where you put the korban olah base sprinkling is the same place where you put the leftover of the korban hatat. And therefore, Chachamim would agree that you can pour them both onto the bottom half of the mizbeach on the wall below the red line. However, Amar Rabbi Yochanan v'Item Rabbi Elazar adayin hi machloket. Yochanan disagrees with Resh Lakish and says, no, the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim is also with the last part of the sprinkling, because he doesn't explain why, but presumably for the same reason that the korban olah has to be on the vertical part of the mizbeach below the red line, whereas the leftover shirayim of the korban hatat have to be on the horizontal ledge of the base. Mativ Rav Huna bar Yehuda kodesh hem sheni im nit'areh bedam kodashim acherim yikrebu ma'elav sof olah u bechor ushmamina mekom olah mekom shirayim. Rav Huna bar Yehuda challenges the opinions of Rav Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan. Really, Rav Yosef is the Amorah from Bavel. Rabbi Yochanan happens to agree. He's disagreeing also in Bavel from a baraita regarding that quotes a pasuk regarding Bechor. It says Kodesh Hem. The firstborn animals are holy. What is that coming to teach? That these are holy. That even if the blood of the Bechor gets mixed up with blood of other sacrifices, still you sacrifice that blood. That's what the Baraita teaches. Now, what kind of case is it talking about? Is it not talking about Sof Olah Bechor, the second sprinkling of the blood below the line and onto the base, where you're permitted, everyone would agree that you can put the blood there because you can put it on the vertical part, and it's permitted because the place of the olah is the same place as the shirayim from a korban hatat that's supposed to be on top, that you sprinkled on top, that now you have the leftover. So you can put the bechor that goes on the bottom, or any other thing that goes on the bottom, and the shirayim of a chatat, you can put it on the bottom, and therefore everybody agrees to that. Challenge against Rav Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan. No, lo techilat olah bechor, no baby intact. When it says, this Baraita says, it's kodesh, and if it gets mixed up, you can still offer it as a sacrifice. It's talking about olah and bechor. Olah and bechor both are sprinkled on the bottom, below the red line, and so therefore they're both in the same place. And so this would be an easy case, and everybody would agree that you can put the blood below the red line. Umay kamash malan. Now, what is it teaching us? Because that's a simple case. Why would we even need a pasuk to say that it's okay? Then olin vebatilim ze et ze. Oh, maybe it's coming to teach us that the two korbanot will not nullify each other. Let's say there's more blood from the olah. Then maybe that will overpower the bechor and say, oh, we don't count the bechor blood here. It's like there's no bechor, or the other way around. And then only one of the korbanot will be fulfilled and not the other, whichever one has more blood will nullify the one that does not have blood. And that's why it has to say kodeshem, that it does not get nullified. But we have another derivation for that very concept. Hai mi velakach midam hapad midam maseh nafka. We can learn that from the pasuk regarding Yom Kippur, where the Kohen Gadol has some blood from the pad and some from the sa'ir, both chatat offerings that are brought inside the Kodesh Kodashim, and he sprinkles it sprinkles from each of them towards the inside the Kodesh, towards the Kodesh Kodashim, towards the parochet, and then says he takes from the blood of the pad and from the sa'ir, and seemingly he mixes it together, and then puts the mixture onto the inner mizbeach. And here we have more blood of the cow certainly has more blood than the sa'ir, and yet it teaches us that from the fact that he says he can take both, mix them together, and put them on the inner mizbeach, means that the more amount of blood will not nullify the sa'ir, which is less. So we already know that concept from this pasuk in Vayikra regarding Yom Kippur. So I wouldn't need Kodeshem to teach me that. And the answer is Tana'ehi Ika denafka lemehacha, Vika denafka lemehacha. There is in fact a machloket Tanaim, and some Tanaim learn it from Kodeshem, and some Tanaim learn it from Vilakach midam hapad umidam hasa'ir. And we're going to see more about that machloket in just a couple of minutes. Mativ Rava. Now another challenge against Rav Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan, who say that you have to have it on the horizontal part and you cannot sprinkle it on the vertical part. We ask, Vehikribu bnei Aharon et hadam v'zariku et hadam. Mata modomar dam. Quoting a pasuk in the beginning of Vayikra regarding Korban Olah, it says that bnei Aharon will bring the blood, and says that they sprinkle the blood. Why do we have to say this twice? Why twice the repetition of the word dam? Sheyachol en li ela elu shnitarebu betmurata, she'af mechayim tikrav. Minayin lerabot toda ushlamim, because I might have thought that when two animals get mixed together, or the blood of the two animals gets mixed together, I might have thought that you can offer it only if they're both korban olah animals. So if you have a korban animal, olah animal, and you do a timurah, which is not allowed, but if you do a timurah, then both of them will be a korban olah. And in that case, even if it's alive, you can lechatechila offer them, and then you slaughter them. And since they're both a korban olah, they're going to be offered in the same way. And even if they're korban olah from two different people, that's also okay. Even when they're alive, we say, well, we got mixed up. We don't know which is which, but that's okay. The Kohen will say, whoever brought this korban olah, this will be for this person, and the other one will be for the other person. And so you can bring them even when they're alive, lechatechila, and certainly if the blood gets mixed up after they're dead. So we don't need a pasuk of dam and dam to teach me that a korban olah get mixed up with another korban olah blood, you can offer. But we still don't know about other cases. So how do you know? Minayin lerabot toda ushlamim. If you have a korban toda and a korban shelamim. Now if the animals are alive and they get mixed up, then we would not offer them together. Instead, we would sell them, and with the proceeds buy new animals, because these are different types of animals. But how do you know that after it's dead, if you mix up the blood, since the blood is offered in the same way, that you do offer them together? Well, because we can learn it from Olah, since because it's similar to Korban Olah. Just like a Korban Olah, one can bring it as a voluntary offering. Todan Shalamim also one can bring as a voluntary offering, and therefore it makes sense that the same law would apply, that if you mix up the bloods, you can offer the blood. So that's how I know, and since it's the same procedure, so it's totally fine. Minayin l'rabot et ha'asham. But how do I know that I would include also a korban asham? Asham cannot be brought as a voluntary offering. And now, if the korban asham gets mixed up with another type of korban, how do you know, like a korban olah? How do you know that you can still offer it? Well, that I also would learn by analogy from the korban olah, since both asham and olah require 4 sprinklings. That's two that are 4 on 2 corners. You put it on each side of one corner, and then the opposite corner each side. So it ends up being on 4 walls, and that's true for an asham and an olah. So since they're similar in that way, I know that if they get mixed up, I can still offer them and put the blood. The blood gets mixed up, I can still offer it. But how about if the blood of Bechor, Maaser, and Pesach get mixed up? These are Kodashim Kalim, and so therefore they're totally different from a Korban Olah. So how would I know that in this case also, if their blood gets mixed up, that you can still offer it on the Mizbeach? Talmud Omar, dam dam. That's why I need this pasuk, dam dam. So this is a long baraita that teaches that the second word, extra word, dam, comes to teach me that even regarding, in all these cases, and even regarding Kodashim Kalim, that blood, whose blood gets mixed up, you can, with a Korban Olah, you can still offer it, since in these cases they're all below the red line. So since they're all below the red line, it's permitted, and everybody would agree to that. Now, let's analyze. We didn't ask the question yet. My love, sof olah ubechor. When it says you can mix them together, is it not talking at what stage of the sprinkling? Is it not talking about the last stage, that you want to pour the leftover of the blood down onto the base? And this says that you can pour the leftover. If one of them is leftover and one of them you're sprinkling, you can put them all in the same place, which means that the sprinkling below the red line and the pouring on the base can be done in the same place, and that would be a proof for the first opinions and a challenge against Rav Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan, who said it has to be on the horizontal part. So we can learn from here that the place where you put a korban olah, let's say that was not sprinkled yet, and you're sprinkling that korban olah blood for the first time, and you have shirayim, a remainder of blood from a bechor, you can put them in the same place. Lo techilat olah bechor. No, this is talking not about the second stage of sprinkling, but about the first stage of sprinkling. You have olah or bechor blood, neither of which you sprinkled on the mizbech at all yet. You can put them both in the same place below the red line, since they both go below the red line. Now you'll ask, what is that coming to teach us? Isn't that obvious? They both go in the same place. And olin mebatilin ze et ze. So maybe it's coming to teach me that different korbanot do not nullify each other. If there's more olah than bechor, or more bechor blood than olah blood, that one does not nullify the other, but you could take the mixture and sprinkle it and you'll fulfill both. Is that what it's teaching? Well, I mean, that is something that we need to learn, but we already have a derivation for that. We already saw that we can learn that from the Yom Kippur, Pad and Sa'ir, that are mixed together, according to this opinion, and placed on the Mizbeach, on the Mizbeach HaPinimi. And so that from there we know there's more Pad blood than Sa'ir blood, and yet it does not nullify. So then I can learn it from there. Why do I need to learn it from this pasuk of Dam Dam? And the answer is Tana'ehi, Ika denafka lemehacha, Vika denafka lemehacha. There are different Tana'im, and some Tana'im learn it from Dam Dam, and some learn it from Yom Kippur. What we have now from this and the previous machloket is 3 different places from which we learn this rule, that when you have more blood of one korban than another korban, one does not nullify the other, but we treat that both bloods are there, and if you sprinkle both of them, then you'll fulfill both obligations. Now, why do we need 3 different pisukim to learn the same thing? One is from the Kodeshem, that's regarding the Bechor, another one from Vayikra regarding Yom Kippur, and the last one is from Vayikra 1:5 where it says Dam Dam. So why do we need all 3? V'hane tana'eh ve'lakach midam hapar midam hasayir la yalfeh kasabre en me'arbim likranot. So the other 2 Tana'im who do not learn it from Yom Kippur, that's because they think that the Kohen Gadol does not actually mix the blood of the pot and the blood of the sa'ir. He keeps them in separate cups the whole time. He sprinkles them separately on the parochet, and then he sprinkles them separately on the corners of the inner mizbeach, and does not mix them. Since he doesn't mix them, so you cannot learn from here that mixtures do not nullify each other. Midam dam layalif, dam dam lamashma lehu. The other two Tanaim who do not learn from the double word dam dam, they think that we're not going to learn from a double word. That's just the way the Torah speaks. Wants to tell you what to do with the dam, and there's no, you don't learn anything from an extra word. Ela mi kodeshem ma'itama la yalfi. But how come the other two Tanaim will not learn from the pasuk regarding the Bechor that says kodeshem kasabre kodeshem hem kerebin ve'en temuratan kereba? They think that we need the words kodeshem to teach me that when it comes to a Bechor, only the Bechor animal itself, the original Bechor that was born as a Bechor, can be offered as a sacrifice, whereas a Timurah will not be offered as a sacrifice. Timurah doesn't work by a Bechor. If you take a Bechor and someone says, I want to switch the Kedusha of this Bechor to some other animal, it doesn't work, because Kodesh Hem, only it is holy and not something else. So since they use it for a different derasha, that's why those two Tanaim require the other derasha, Dam Dam or Yom Kippur. Ve'idach, and how about the Tana that does use Kodeshem? From where will he learn this law that a Timurah does not become holy for a Bechor? Nafkale me im shor im se laHashem hu karev and Timurato kereba. He can learn that same law from another pasuk that it says regarding a Bechor that says whether it's an ox or a sheep, it belongs to Hashem. It belongs to Hashem, who? And not a substitute. The substitute will not belong to Hashem. So he already has another pasuk to teach me that, and therefore he can use Kodeshem to teach me this principle that blood of two different animals do not nullify each other. And now we will have one last challenge against the opinion of Rav Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan from a Baraita Tashema. Natan lema'la velo nimlach elu va'elu modim sheyachzor v'yiten lemata elu va'elu olin lo. We cited this Baraita also on the previous daf, and it teaches that if one already placed the blood above without asking, in other words, even according to Chachamim, who say that if you have mixed blood, then you have to pour it into the temple courtyard. But b'di'avad, if the Kohen did not ask the sages, they would have told him to pour it down the drain, but he didn't ask, and instead he sprinkled it above the line, then everybody agrees, both Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim, that he should go ahead and pour the rest of it below the line, and that will fulfill all of his obligations for the chatat offering that should be above and for other offerings that should be below. Now, what types of offerings are we joining together, or got mixed up together? Ma'lav di arub hatat ve'ola ve'chevan di ahib lema'la havu lehu shirayim ve'katane elu ve'elu modim she'achzor v'yiten lemata ushma mina mekom ola mekom shirayim. Are we not talking about where the blood of a korban hatat got mixed up with blood of a korban olah? And since it was already sprinkled above, so now the korban hatat is taken care of, and the rest of the blood of the korban hatat is left over. And yet, it says in the Baraita that everybody agrees that you can go ahead and pour the rest below the line, and that way the olah is supposed to be below the line, that's okay, and the hatat also will be in the same place. So we can learn from here that the place where one sprinkles olah blood is the same as where one pours out the remainder of a chatat blood. And that is a challenge against Rav Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan. Ki ata Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef amar, Amri b'ma'arava, hacha b'ma'eskinan, kegon di'arav hatat hachitzona b'shirayim. When Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said, in Eretz Yisrael, they interpret this Baraita not as talking about a Chatat and Olah offering, but rather two Chatat offerings, one that's supposed to be outside with one that is sprinkled inside. And what happened is, you have blood that from an outside Chatat that you did not sprinkle on top yet. And then you have blood from an inside Korban that you already sprinkled the blood on the top of the inner mizbeach, and now the bloods got mixed together. If they would have asked, then the sages would have said, no, it's you can't sprinkle the inner the inner blood on top of the outer mizbeach, and so you have to pour it all down the drain. But if they already did it, then they would agree that you can pour the leftover of both of them. Now that you sprinkled the mixture on top of the outer mizbeach, you can pour the remainder below on the below onto the base. And this is shirayim for 2 korban chatats. Shirayim for an outer korban chatat gets put on the base, and shirayim of an inner chatat, although it's sprinkled on the inner mizbeach, the shirayim gets poured out on the outer mizbeach, and so you do the same thing with both of them, and that would solve the problem. There's no challenge. We're not talking about a korban olah that has to get its first sprinkling below. That indeed would be in a different place, and the shirayim has to be on the horizontal part. But this baraita is talking about both of them are korban chatats that both have to be put on the horizontal part, and that would resolve the question. Amar le Abaye, v'nemamor kegon di'ara b'shirayim. Abaye says, why did you go and find a case of an inner and outer chatat offerings? You can have a simpler case that 2 korban chatat offerings got mixed up, both of them outer chatats. One of them you did not sprinkle the blood above yet, and the other one you already sprinkled it above, and you just have to pour it out, and they got mixed together. And now, you might, if you asked, you would say, well, the one that you already sprinkled only has to be poured on the bottom. You can't go sprinkle more of it. And that's what, but since he did it already, if he took that mixture and sprinkled it on top already, then he can go ahead and pour the rest of it below. And that would also solve the problem, because now that you sprinkled it on top, all the rest of it is shirayim that gets poured on the horizontal part. And so that would be a simpler way of explaining this baraita. Dilma ha kamashmalan afilu lemandama shirayim me'akevin chasru en me'akevin. Now, what would be the chidush? What would it be teaching us? That even according to the opinion that says shirayim is required, there is an opinion. The question is, if you don't pour the remainder on the base, did you fulfill the obligation of the korban or not? Even according to the person that says you have to pour it on the base, and if you didn't pour the remainder on the base, it's no good, they would agree that if you just lessened the blood, it's just lacking because you put some of it above. That's not me'akev, that still would be okay. And that's why in this case, you have this mixture, and now all of the remainder should, lechatechila, all of the remainder of the blood that you already sprinkled on top should go on the base. But now, b'diavad, you sprinkled some of it on top again without asking. But that's okay, even though it's lacking. But some of it, everything that's left, you're pouring onto the base, and therefore that's okay. And that's what this baraita is teaching us. And so, wouldn't that be a simpler way this would be a simpler way of interpreting that baraita? Amar le Rava Tosfa le Ravina. Ha okimna behahi beruba elyonim vekayahib lema'ala shur tachtonim ve'od. Rava Tosfa asked Ravina, when we discussed this baraita on the previous daf, didn't we already make an okimta and say that it's talking about a case where you had a majority of hatat blood that has to be on top, and a minority of blood of a korban olah, or whatever korban that has to go on the bottom. And you placed on top the amount of blood that would go on the bottom plus some more. Right? We gave an example of like 51% is korban chatat blood and 49% is korban olah blood, and you put at least 51% of the blood on top. And in that way, even if it's not well mixed together and bilah, still you could be sure that even if you put all of the korban olah blood on top, some of the blood that you put on top is still korban chatat blood, and that's how we can guarantee that you have korban chatat blood above. And then this would be a problem, because if it's possible that you put all the korban chatat blood above, then there's no more korban chatat blood to put on the bottom, and then you're not doing any shirayim and shirayim me'akavin, and then that would be a problem according to that interpretation. But Ravina answers, Maskana bechosot pelige. Says, yeah, that's only in that discussion above, according to the opinion. That was Rav Ashi, who said en bila, and we were trying to reconcile and explain the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer according to the interpretation of Rav Ashi, who said en bila, and in order to reconcile the various baraitot with Rav Ashi's interpretation of Rabbi Eliezer, so we had to come to this okimta. But in the end, we found a different explanation, which is that they're not arguing on a case of blood mixed into one cup, but rather when the two separate cups get mixed up with each other, but they're in separate cups. That's how we started the daf today. And therefore you see that this is a very important principle. When the Gemara makes various okimtot, various forced explanations in order to reconcile something, it's not saying that that is the definitive explanation of that source. They're just trying their best to see if they can reconcile as many sources as they can according to every different opinion. But they recognize that sometimes it's forced, and the more force you have to put to reconcile something, the more dachuk it is, the more difficult it is. And in the end, because they had so many questions on that opinion, and they were not able to reconcile all of them, so then the Gemara introduced a completely different interpretation. Once you have that completely different interpretation, that is two separate cups in this case, then the forced interpretations that we had above are not necessary any longer. And therefore that's exactly what he's saying. You don't have to assume that interpretation anymore, now that we understand that the machloket in the Mishnah was about separate cups. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.